All is now set for the conduct of the supplementary election of the Anambra State governorship poll in Ihiala local government area. The Independent National Electoral Commission did not hold any election in Ihiala last Saturday because it failed to deploy personnel and materials to the area due to security threats. As a result, the commission deliberated with security operatives on Sunday night and decided to hold the supplementary election today. The Nigerian police force said on Monday that all the necessary security arrangements have been made to ensure that the supplementary poll holds without any problem. Ihiala has a total of 148,407 registered voters that Professor Charles Soludo, the candidate of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, Valentine Ozigbo of the People's Democratic Party, and Senator Andy Uba of the All Progressives Congress are expected to vie for. But as it stands, Soludo has been declared winner in 18 out of the 21 local government areas in the state, with 103,964 votes. He also leads his closest rival in the election, Valentine Ozigbo, by 52,624 votes. This means that Ozigbo, who has expressed confidence that he can still beat Soludo, will have to secure about 60,000 votes in Ihiala to surmount the APGA candidate's lead. Now, joining us to discuss what to expect as voters in Ihiala head to the polls to determine the fate of the candidates, as well as the performance of Inec and the security agencies during the election, is Clement Nwankwo, a lawyer and civil rights activist and convener of the Civil Society Situation Room. The Civil Society Situation Room deployed one of the largest teams of observers in Anambra for the governorship election. Good morning, Clement, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ruben. Good morning, all. Really just to say that at this stage, I ceased being a convener of the Situation Room since November last year. The present convener, NOB, led the Situation Room team in observing the Anambra State governorship elections. We kept a close eye as well and quite closely monitoring and observing what is going on in Ihiala this morning. And we're all looking forward to a smooth conduct of the elections and the final declaration of results by Inec.
Yeah, okay, I stand corrected. Actually, NLB was on the program with me this day live on Sunday, and she was on the ground as a convener of the Situation Room. But, I mean, you've been involved in this electoral process almost forever. As an observer. And
I was convener for 10 years, so I can understand that people still think this, yes.
Very quickly, let me ask you, what are your takeaways from what has happened so far in the Anambra gubernatorial election? I've seen a piece by Chidi Odinkanu talking about interim takeaways. And that's the inspiration for me asking you, what are your own takeaways so far? And, what are your expectations in terms of the electoral process today in Ihiala local government area?
Well, certainly there are takeaways, and I think that the first takeaway is the determination that we saw from the people of Anambra State, who, in spite of all that happened, in spite of the violence, in spite of the intimidation, in spite of the escalated violence that seems to have been triggered with a view to interfering even with the elections holding, I think that the Anambra State people, within a few days, were able to mobilize. Yes, historically, you might say that this would be one of the lowest turnouts in elections, but I think that the courage of people in coming out to vote in the face of violence provoked by different forces, I think it's something that must be very commended. And we encourage that with respect to Ihiala today, that the people of Anambra State, the people from Ihiala local government should also determine to go out and cast their votes. And we believe that all of the political parties need to participate and encourage their supporters to come out and vote and defend their votes. Secondly, I think when you look at the conversations around improvements of the electoral process, it was significant to see Inec deploy for the first time and on a wide basis the use of its new system, what it calls BVAS, to be able to replace the smart card readers. It was significant watching that, and I think that the observations from that is a good takeaway, looking towards the fact that the National Assembly has a new electoral bill that we hope that it will be able to approve this week. I think that taking away from that, we would see what has happened and what needs to improve in the application of electronics and technology in elections. So I think that's the second takeaway. Thirdly, I think is the fact that on actual voting day, what appeared to have been an intimidating presence of security forces almost dissipated, and we did see good conduct on the part of security forces. And I think also it adds to the fact that people are asking the question, what is really instigating a lot of the violence in the Southeast? Yes, there is the group IPOP that is continually talking rhetorics that is very unhelpful and declaring sit-at-homes that is very devastating to the economy of the Southeast, and this must be condemned. But what I think is really important is also to ask, what is the conduct of security forces in the Southeast, and how does the conduct of security forces in the Southeast worsen the security situation? I think we need to take lessons from that and ask these very critical questions and ask whether it is not time for security forces in the Southeast to review their strategies. There are a few more takeaways, but also we must commend civil society, the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, and other observer groups from civil society who braved the odds and went into Anambra State and stood firm and observed the elections and came up with the reports that they did. So I think these are a few takeaways that I can immediately cite at this time.
That's a really interesting point that you made about a possible review of security arrangements in the Southeast, since the advertised Armageddon did not in fact happen. I just wanted to underline that. But what is your take on the lengths to which Inec has gone to ensure that the people of Ihiala local government area have their say?
Well, from conversations with Inec, I think, first of all, Inec must be commended for stopping what appeared to have been an attempt to subvert the count of votes from or reflection of voting from Ihiala. I think there were some issues that Inec stood firm to say, look, voting did not actually take place in Ihiala, and we have to go back and do the right thing. Inec did the same with Orumba North, where it insisted on, in the light of the controversy created by its official, to go back and review and recount and come up with actual votes. So with respect to Ihiala, I think Inec must be commended for mustering the ability to go back into Ihiala. I think that there were lots and lots of challenges with BVAS and even a few lapses that I hope that Inec is able to stand firm and correct today as voting goes on, and again come up with voting that reflects or results that reflect the voting that people have made in or will make in Ihiala.
So I'd like to talk about the BVAS, the Bimodal Voter Accreditation System. Inec was very bullish about this system. In fact, they said it had worked about 97%, which was quite scary, for me, if they say that out of the Isoko elections. And I said it was scary for me because of the high level of, certainty and how error-proof they claimed it was. Because when you look at that, that's a margin of error of plus or minus 3. If you say something is 97%, but it did not deliver that way, in the Anambra elections. What happened to the BVAS? What are the lessons they can take? Obviously, these are teething problems with technology, but why didn't they iterate different scenarios? Because that's a shocking part for me. The fact, yes, technology didn't work, But
Yeah.
the iteration of different scenarios at that point when the technology is not working, because it took them time to even resort to incident form and the like. It took them time to create alternatives, you know.
Yeah, Rufai, I think you put your fingers to it. BVAS is supposed to be the replacement for all of the previous technologies applied, whether it's the smart card readers or even the Z-Pad. My sense of it is that in the light of the uncertainties around the Anambra elections happening or not, in the light of the siege on Inec's own preparations, I think that there might have been a gap that Inec did not do what it should do with respect to the machines. The elections in Delta State was a very minute constituency. Anambra, of course, is bigger. I think that you're right about scenarios. I think, did Inec stimulate the BVAS? Did it do a test run? Did it ensure that all of the machines that it deployed were technically uplifted and ready to work? I think that there may have been some challenges with that, and I think that, and I hope that Inec takes lessons from it. When Inec says, oh, we are ready, there is no obstacle, we have trained observers, we have deployed the machines, we have done all and all and all, Inec needs to prepare that it must match its words with action. And I think that with respect to these, there were gaps that INEC needs to go back and review. Again, I think that with improvements that we have seen in the electoral bill that is awaiting approval by the National Assembly, and we hope that it does that quite quickly now, INEC would have a lot more responsibility on it, and I think that INEC really needs to prepare that the expectations on it for 2023 would really be very, very high, and it really needs to step up the table.
Okay, one subject we have had to deal with this morning on this program is whether or not the supplementary voting in Iala today will be a game changer, what one publication refers to as the Iala factor. Do you think that anything as shaking could possibly happen in terms of the results that we have so far, since the gap between the leading candidate of the ABGA and the candidate of the PDP is just about 52,000 plus. And the candidate of the PDP is saying, well, he can still swing it. What do you think?
Ruben, I think what would be earth-shaking would be if the current trend is not sustained. I think when you look at the fact that you have probably about 148,000, 150,000 registered voters, when you look at the fact that across the state in these particular elections, the turnout of voters, we don't know the final figures yet, but probably 15% or certainly less than 20%. When you look at that trend and then you take that percentage, maybe even double that percentage and move it to Ihiala, perhaps have a huge turnout in Ihiala, certainly those percentages would not escalate the number of voter turnout. And don't forget that you have very, very strong candidates from 3 or even 4 political parties running. The votes will be shared. I wouldn't want to say anything directly on who would win or not, but it seems that a trend has been created. And for me, I think what would be earth-shaking would be if that trend is reversed.
Right, we'll just have to wait and see. What are your thoughts on how this election and the lessons that we've learned, issues arising, will impact the general election in 2023?
Tudu, I think this is really the key question for all of us. I think that as we look towards 2023, there must be lessons taken. Yes, there are a couple of governorship elections coming up ahead of 2023, but I think that this would be the last election conducted by INEC ahead of the ascent, we hope that happens quickly, I keep saying that, to the new electoral bill. It means that the new electoral bill will introduce additional safeguards for elections in this country. And I think that taking lessons from Anambra State, INEC needs to ask itself the question how it prepares to match its actions to the rhetorics that it puts out about its preparations for the elections. I think that the technology being introduced, I think the new timelines that the electoral bill will introduce, requirements that INEC must prepare to observe even the primaries of the political parties. All of this would be new introductions that I think that INEC needs to sit down very much calmly and introspectively to look at what the new electoral bill is saying and prepare that once this bill comes into effect, that it must review its strategies, it must prepare, it must engage and train its staff to not fail. When you look at the beavers, the process of a person voting as soon as the machine comes on is between 2 to 3 minutes. How do you cope with that in a line of 500 people? How do you ensure that the transition time between one voter to the other, and in Anambra State, it was an average of almost 10 minutes after one person votes before the machine re-engineers to take on the next voter? How do you deal with those timelines? Another critical question, and I don't think that INEC has sufficient time to do that, but we must ask ourselves, and I think this is continually said, what is the voters register that we have today? I have my serious questions about the current voters register. It was created in 2010, and what you have seen since then has been add-ons to it and basically building on that system that I think, quite frankly, needs to be totally overhauled. So those are challenges that INEC must prepare to deal with as we move towards 2023. But certainly voters are much more aware, as you saw in Anambra State, when people came out in spite of the challenges. Following from the NSAS protest and anger over it, young people are very determined to come out and participate in the choice of who rules in 2023. So let no one make any mistake in thinking that there would be lethargy or docility as we head towards 2023. Citizens are mobilized, they will participate in elections, and given the failure of expectations that we have seen with current government and current dispensation, I think people believe now that they can make a difference in 2023.
So I'm going to talk about two things. What's the viability of the logistics of very sensitive material transportation by NURTW members? I mean, what's the viability of that? INEC does that over the years, but you know, it looks quite quirky for me. And secondly, how are we going to solve this problem of electoral offenses, you know, prosecuting those people? A lot of people have advocated for another commission to do that apart from INEC, you know, as stated in the Waste report. Let's talk through that. But that logistic of, you know, using NURTW, just normal buses to transport sensitive electoral materials?
Thanks, Rufai. I think that when the whole issue of collation, and I didn't talk about that as well with respect to the expected electoral law, a new one, collation is really key, and I think we have to examine how collation will now work with respect to the new technologies that are coming on. But very importantly, the NURTW has a problem or perception of politicization of itself. And you can see the role it plays in actual partisan politics where some of its leaders take positions. Now, relying on that organization solely to deal with logistics of moving equipments around, moving materials around, I think is a challenge that INEC needs to sit on the table and decide how to deal with. And quite frankly, I agree with you, Rufai, we must look at the role of the NURTW in elections and logistics failures. In 2011, the elections were postponed. The general elections were postponed. That was supposed to hold on April 2nd, was postponed. There was failure of logistics. In 2015, elections were postponed because of, again, challenges with logistics. In 2019, it was a nightmare. If you note, the elections, it had even started or was about to start when we realized that materials are not going to get to everywhere because of logistics challenges. So I think that logistics is so very critical that INEC must sit down, maybe have a convening to get alternative views on how we can overcome the current logistics challenges. On Electoral Offenses Commission, I totally believe that it's important that people be held to account for misbehavior, for misdemeanors, and for other offenses committed with elections. And you need a commission that is set up, that is empowered, and that operates in a very non-partisan way to deal with electoral offenses. And as long as people feel they can get away with electoral offenses, then we have a problem. If you observe with the Anambra elections, this hasn't been highlighted in a lot of reports, but there were incidents, serious incidents of vote buying to the point that the figures are now going up. We were dealing previously with 1,000 naira paid to voters to buy their votes. It went up to 5,000 naira in some states. And today in Anambra, in some cases, there were reports of 10,000 naira being paid to buy the votes. The Electoral Offenses Commission will be important. The electoral bill that is awaiting final approval and assent didn't touch the issue of election campaign finance. And I think, again, they are all linked. Vote buying, election campaign finance, Electoral Offenses Commission are all linked. So there is an important, there is important evidence that exists that supports the creation of an Electoral Offenses Commission. And I'm happy that this bill has been in the National Assembly. The politicians need to take it seriously and work towards giving us a new Electoral Offenses Commission that is prepared to work to deal with this particular problem.
Well, if we could just dwell a little bit more on the security arrangements. Over 20,000 persons from the civil defense, over 34,000 personnel from the police force, not to talk of the Department of State Security. And this is just an off-cycle election occurring in Anambra. If it were to be a regular election, are we likely to deploy over 300,000 Nigerian policemen to man polling booths across the country? However, are you satisfied with the fact that we've not been told that there was any involvement, either in vote buying or intimidation of voters by the Nigeria police and other security personnel? How do you assess the performance of the security agencies?
Thank you. I think voting day, and Tudu made that point about taking notes about the role of security forces in the Southeast generally. I think there is a huge worry about the role of security forces, the military in the Southeast. I think we need to ask ourselves what is going on, because there are different dimensions to this issue. And as you may know, this all started with Imo State, especially after the Supreme Court gave that wild decision on the governorship election in Imo State. But coming to the election itself, I think it's really a question whether you need to deploy that much number of people for security forces for elections. Because on voting day, really, you count the number of polling units, you count the number of unarmed security deployment to polling units to ensure law and order. And then what is needed is additional numbers of roving security personnel that go around doing all of this. So I think that there is need for coordination between the security services, whether it is road safety, civil defense, and so on. The whole idea of loading a particular voting area with all manners of security personnel is something that we need to ask ourselves. I think that INEC needs to have, I know that it has the election coordination meetings that it has, the security coordination meetings, but my sense of it is that INEC need to determine how many security personnel you need in particular polling units, this needs to be standardized, and you know that whether it is police or civil defense or road safety or whichever of the uniformed security personnel you put at polling units, those numbers must not be replicated by every security unit. So coordination between security forces, I think, would help a lot in reducing these deployments that sometimes tend to frighten voters from turning out for elections. But certainly voting day in Anambra State, I think that the report has not been unpleasant of the actions of security personnel, and we must commend them for this.
Well, thank you very much, Clement Nwankwo, for joining us on the morning show. Thank you very much indeed.